I did not make a scene. I did not raise my voice. I simply smiled, shook a few hands, and drove home. 2 days later, my son had 47 missed calls on his phone, all from his wife, his landlord, and his bank. He didn't call me until the third day. By then, I had already changed my number. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. My name is George. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working as a general contractor in Columbus, Ohio. Early mornings, late nights, weekends, holidays. I built houses for other families while my own family lived in a modest 3-bedroom on Clearwater Drive. I drove a used pickup truck until it had over 200,000 miles on it. I packed my lunch every single day for those 31 years. Not because I had to, because I believed in saving for something better. For my children, I have 2 kids. My daughter, Lisa, is 31. She lives in Denver with her husband and my 2 grandkids. She calls me every Sunday. She's the one who still signs birthday cards with a little drawing the way she did when she was 8. I love her more than I can put into words. And then there's my son. My son is 34. His name is Nathan. Nathan is the kind of man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. I didn't always see it that way. For a long time, I told myself he was just ambitious, that he just wanted more than what we had growing up, that his hunger was a good thing, a sign that he was going somewhere. I told myself all of that because I loved him. I told myself all of that because I needed to believe the money I was spending on him was an investment, not a donation to someone who had already written me off. Nathan always had a plan. Even as a kid, he had a way of presenting you with a plan, looking you right in the eye, talking fast and smooth, filling the room with enough confidence that you felt foolish for hesitating. He got that from his mother's side, I think. She was a beautiful woman who could talk anyone into anything. God rest her soul. She passed 9 years ago, and after that it was just me, Nathan, and Lisa. When Nathan told me he wanted to get an MBA from a private university in Boston, I didn't hesitate. His undergraduate GPA was strong. The school was legitimate. He laid out the whole picture, the tuition cost, the housing, the living expenses, the timeline. He even had a spreadsheet. I remember sitting at the kitchen table looking at that spreadsheet and thinking, that's my boy. That's the kid I raised. The total came to just over $94,000 over 2 years. I had the money. Not liquid, but I had it. I had a retirement account I had been building for 22 years. I pulled from it. I took the tax penalty, paid the fees, and wired Nathan his first installment within the week. I told him it was a gift. I told him I didn't want him starting his life buried in loan debt. I told him his mother would have wanted this. He said, "Thanks, Dad." And then he went to Boston. For the first semester, he called about once a week. By the second semester, it was once a month. By the start of his second year, I was the one making the calls. I'd leave voicemails and he'd send back a text, sometimes just a thumbs-up emoji. I told myself he was busy. I told myself that's what graduate school does to a person. I kept sending the installments on schedule. Every 3 months, like clockwork. I flew out to Boston once, during his first year. I didn't tell him ahead of time because I wanted to surprise him. I'd been having chest pains, and the doctor had mentioned I should take things easier, reduce stress, maybe take a trip somewhere, so I thought, why not go see my son? I bought a round-trip ticket, booked a hotel 2 blocks from his apartment, and flew out on a Tuesday morning. I texted him when I landed. He didn't respond for 4 hours. When he finally called back, he sounded annoyed. He said he was in the middle of a study group and couldn't really do dinner that night. I said that was fine. Maybe tomorrow. He said tomorrow was also complicated. We ended up getting coffee on Wednesday morning, 45 minutes, at a place near his building. He spent most of it on his phone. When we hugged goodbye, it felt like hugging a stranger. I flew home and didn't mention the chest pains to anyone. I kept paying. Nathan graduated in May of last year. He had accepted a position at a consulting firm in Chicago. Good salary, good benefits, the kind of job that has a title long enough to fill 2 lines on a business card. I was proud of him. I genuinely was. Whatever had been going on between us, whatever distance had grown, I told myself it didn't matter. He had made something of himself. That was what I had worked for. His graduation ceremony was on a Saturday. Nathan called me 2 weeks before and told me I was welcome to come. I want to be precise about that word welcome. Not invited. Not Dad, I really want you there. Welcome. Like I was a guest at a restaurant that hadn't been fully booked yet. I told him I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world. I booked my flight, booked a hotel, bought a new suit. A real one. Not just the old blazer I wear to church. I had it tailored. I wanted to look like the kind of father a man would be proud to introduce. The ceremony was held at an auditorium on campus. 1,400 seats, maybe more. Families everywhere. Fathers in button-downs, mothers in dresses, younger siblings bored and fidgeting in the chairs. It was loud and warm and full of the particular energy of a room where everyone is happy for someone else. I found my seat. I watched Nathan walk across the stage. I stood up and clapped louder than anyone around me. The woman next to me smiled. I had tears in my eyes. Real ones. The kind you can't manufacture. After the ceremony, there was a reception in a large courtyard outside the auditorium. I found Nathan in the crowd. He was standing with a group of 6 or 7 people, all around his age, all dressed the way people dress when they want to look like they've already made it. Crisp shirts, expensive watches, that particular kind of casual confidence that costs money to perform. There was a woman at the center of the group who kept touching Nathan's arm when she laughed. His future colleagues, I assumed. I walked over. I was smiling. I had my hand out. Nathan saw me coming and something passed over his face. It was quick, barely a second, but I saw it. I've been reading my son's face for 34 years. What I saw was not joy. It was not even neutral. It was the particular tightening that a person does when something inconvenient has arrived. He recovered fast. He always does. Dad, he said, you made it. Not, I'm so glad you're here. Not everyone. This is my father. Just, you made it. The way you'd say it to a repairman who showed up to fix the dishwasher. I shook his hand. He didn't hug me. One of his friends, a tall kid with a firm handshake, reached out and said, you must be Nathan's dad. I'm Derek. Great to meet you. I said it was great to meet him too, Nathan said. And I will remember this for the rest of my life, he said. Yeah, this is my dad. He's from back home. And then he turned back to the group and continued the conversation he had been having before I walked over. Back home. That was the whole introduction. That was what 31 years of early mornings. That was what $94,000. That was what a tailored suit and a red-eye flight and 22 years of a retirement account. That was what all of it amounted to. Back home. I stood at the edge of that group for about 10 minutes. Nobody was rude to me. Nobody ignored me on purpose. They just talked around me the way people talk around someone who isn't quite part of the conversation. Nathan answered my questions when I asked them. He just never included me. At some point, his future colleague, the woman who kept laughing and touching his arm, asked Nathan how he had funded the program without taking on loans. She said it almost admiringly, like it was some kind of achievement. Nathan smiled and said, I had some help. Family situation. Not. My father paid for my education. Not. My dad sacrificed his retirement savings so I could be standing here. Just. Family situation. Like it was a trust fund that had appeared from nowhere, like no one in particular had worked for it. I excused myself to find the restroom. I stood in front of the mirror in that men's room for a long time. Not crying, not angry, just thinking. There's a particular kind of clarity that comes when something you've been quietly suspecting for years finally shows up in plain view. It doesn't feel like shock. It feels like confirmation. I thought about the ticket I had bought to surprise him in Boston. The coffee, the 45 minutes, the hug that felt like hugging a stranger. I thought about the spreadsheet he had laid out on my kitchen table. How detailed it was. How prepared. I thought about the word welcome. I straightened my new tie. I walked back out into the courtyard. I found Nathan, and I told him I had a long drive and needed to head out. He said, okay, thanks for coming. Safe travels. His eyes were already moving back to the group before I'd finished turning around. I walked to the parking garage. I sat in my rental car for a while. Then I called my accountant. What most people don't know what Nathan had apparently forgotten, or perhaps never paid attention to in the first place, is that the money I gave him was structured as a conditional gift. I'd had my accountant draw it up properly when Nathan first went to school. The condition was simple. The funds were a gift in full so long as Nathan maintained a relationship of basic communication and respect with me through his professional establishment. It was a formality, my accountant had said at the time, more of a document for tax purposes than anything else. We had both laughed about it. I stopped laughing in that parking garage. I also had something else. Over the years, I had been quietly co-signing on Nathan's apartment lease. Not just in Boston, in Chicago too, at his new place. He had asked me 2 months before graduation, said his employment hadn't officially started yet, and the building required a co-signer. I had agreed without hesitation. I had signed the documents that same afternoon. I'm a co-signer, which means I have certain rights under the terms of the agreement, specifically around notification and financial review, rights that my accountant understood very well. I drove back to my hotel. I ordered room service. I watched the news. I slept better than I had in months. I did not call Nathan the next morning. I did not send a text. I flew home to Columbus on Sunday, unpacked my suitcase, changed back into my regular clothes, and went to church. On Monday, I met with my accountant. His name is Phil, and I have trusted him for 19 years. I laid out the situation calmly. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I appreciate most about Phil. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "George, you've been very patient." I told him I'd been a fool. He said those weren't mutually exclusive. We went through the documents together. The conditional gift agreement, the co-signed paperwork, a review of the total disbursements over 2 years, the tuition payments, the housing supplements, the monthly living allowance I had been sending even after the formal tuition was paid because Nathan had told me consulting firm salaries didn't kick in until after the first quarter. $94,000 in tuition, $11,000 in housing supplement, 8 months of living allowance at $2,000 a month, $16,000. Total disbursement, $121,000. Phil said, "Do you want to invoke the condition clause?" I said yes. He said, "And the cosign?" I thought about Nathan standing in that courtyard, his hand moving me aside like furniture while he talked to people who actually mattered to him. I said, "Give notice." Phil nodded and started typing. The cosign withdrawal notice went to the building management company in Chicago that Wednesday. Under the terms of the lease, the building had to notify Nathan within 5 business days that his cosigner had withdrawn and that he would need to provide an alternative or face a lease review. It was not an eviction. It was an administrative notification. Legal, clean, and utterly routine. The conditional gift invocation went to Nathan directly via certified letter, return receipt requested. I went home and mowed my lawn. I had dinner. I watched the game. I called Lisa on Sunday the way I always do, and she asked how graduation had gone, and I told her it had been a beautiful ceremony and that I was proud of him. All of that was true. Nathan called on a Friday, 11 days after graduation. I know because I had changed my cell number the previous weekend and had given the new number only to Lisa, my doctor, and Phil. So when Nathan called, he called the house phone, the landline I've kept all these years, the one he hadn't dialed in probably 4 years. I let it ring. He left a voicemail. His voice was different than I had heard it in a long time. Not smooth, not fast, tight. He said, "Dad, I don't know what's going on, but I got some kind of letter from a law office, and the building is saying there's a problem with the lease. Call me back." I wrote down the time he called. 4:47 inches the afternoon. I did not call back. He called the house phone 3 more times over the next 2 days. I let them all go to voicemail. On the 4th message, his voice had changed again. Less tight, more strained. He mentioned that he had tried to use a credit account, and it had been flagged for review. He mentioned that something called a conditional agreement was being discussed, and that he didn't fully understand what it meant. He said, "Dad, seriously, call me." I went to church. I had lunch with a friend from the congregation, a retired teacher named Harold who is 81 years old and still tends a vegetable garden every spring. We talked about tomatoes and whether the Indians had a chance this season. It was a very good afternoon. On the 5th day, I called Nathan back. I called him from the new number, so it came up as unknown. He answered on the first ring. "Hello?" I said. "It's Dad." There was a pause. long enough to tell me he was recalibrating. He said, "Dad, what's going on? I've been trying to reach you." I told him I had changed numbers. I told him I had been busy. I asked how Chicago was treating him. He said, "Dad, there's something going on with the lease, and there's a letter about some kind of conditional agreement, and I don't really understand what's happening." I told him I could explain. I told him about the conditional gift clause, calmly and in plain language. I told him about the cosign withdrawal. I told him I had given it a great deal of thought, and that I felt, after considerable reflection, that the terms of our relationship no longer met the conditions originally agreed upon. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "This is about graduation, isn't it?" I said I didn't know what he meant. He said, "I know I wasn't. I mean, it was a lot going on. My colleagues were there, and it was just a lot happening at once, and I didn't." I said, "Nathan, you introduced me as someone from back home." He started to say something about stress, about the transition, about how it wasn't personal. He said, I was reading too much into it. He said I always did this, took things out of context, made them bigger than they were. His voice was getting faster, the old rhythm coming back, the smooth talk filling the silence. I let him go for about 2 minutes. Then I said, "Nathan, I want you to think about something. For the last 2 years, I have sent you, in total, $121,000. The line went quiet. I said, "I want you to think about what you said when you introduced me at your graduation." He didn't say anything. I told him the cosign withdrawal was already in process and that the building would be in touch with him about next steps. I told him Phil had all the documentation if he had questions. I told him I wished him well in his new position and that I hoped Chicago was a good city for him. Then I said, "Take care of yourself, son." And I hung up. I'm not going to tell you it felt good. That's what people want to hear in these situations, that the moment of reckoning arrives and it feels like justice, clean and complete. It didn't feel like that. It felt like closing a door on a room you had spent 30 years decorating. Even when the room has been neglected and stripped bare, closing the door still costs you something. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after I hung up. I thought about Nathan at 4 years old, running to the door when he heard my truck in the driveway. I thought about his first day of school, and how he had been so nervous he'd barely eaten breakfast but had refused to admit it. I thought about the night after his mother's funeral when I had found him sitting alone in the backyard at 2 a.m, and I had sat down next to him, and we had been quiet together for almost an hour without saying a single word. I thought about a lot of things, but I also thought about a parking garage in Boston, a mirror in a men's room, a courtyard full of people to whom I was just a family situation from back home. A man can love his son completely and still refuse to be erased by him. That's something I know now. I didn't always know it, but I know it now. Lisa called the following Sunday, as she always does. She mentioned that Nathan had reached out to her. She didn't say what about, and I didn't ask. She asked if I was doing all right. I told her I was doing fine. I told her I'd been sleeping well, actually. She laughed and said I sounded better than I had in a long time. She was right. I did. Nathan has not called the new number. Maybe he doesn't have it. Maybe he has it and he doesn't know what to say. I don't know which it is. I check the answering machine on the house phone every few days out of habit. There have been a few calls, hang-ups, mostly. No more voicemails. Phil called last week to let me know the process is moving forward. The conditional invocation is being reviewed by both parties' counsel, which means Nathan had to go get a lawyer, which means his first month of consulting firm salary is going toward legal fees. That's not something I feel good about, but it's also not something I caused. I structured an agreement, and I honored it for 2 full years. What happened at that graduation was Nathan's choice. The consequences are just math. I've started keeping a different kind of schedule lately. I wake up at 6:30 instead of 5. I have coffee on the porch when the weather allows. I called Harold about joining a woodworking group he's been part of for years. I went to my first session last Thursday and built the worst birdhouse you have ever seen in your life. And I haven't laughed that hard since before my wife passed. I'm not angry. I want to be clear about that. Anger takes energy, and I've spent enough of mine already. What I feel is something closer to clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop pretending a thing is other than what it is. My son is a man who is very skilled at receiving and not very skilled at acknowledging. That is the truth of who he is right now. Maybe it changes. People can change. I have seen it happen. But change requires pressure. And sometimes the most loving thing a father can do is stop absorbing all the pressure himself. I'm not from back home. I'm his father. The man who pulled from his retirement account. The man who sat with him in the backyard at 2 in the morning after the worst night of both of our lives. The man who flew to Boston to see him and got 45 minutes and a thumbs up emoji and kept sending the money anyway. That man deserves an introduction. And until my son understands that, I've got birdhouses to build.